in the early 90s. And so one of the reasons we were excited about Dublin is to find out you had your own museum, which is quite a nice museum. I presume people will get down there to take a look at it, if you haven't already. Because that's the important thing to us in a lot of ways, was that people could say whatever they want about marijuana, but a piece of hemp is something you can hold in your hand. You can't argue with a piece of fabric or a piece of hempcrete, which didn't even exist at the time that we got started on this issue. But so we started working on it from different point of views, but one of the main things is that the United States is part of the United Nations, and the United Nations has the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And the Declaration of Human Rights says that people are entitled to an honest education, that we're entitled to the benefits of science, that we're entitled to medicines that work for us, that we're entitled to the facts and the truth, that we're entitled to protect our families, and we're entitled to have jobs that are meaningful and traditional kinds of work. And all those things, to me, tie back to the cannabis plant. So, whereas I had been working on a lot of different issues, when it came to cannabis, we decided that this is one issue that ties a lot of the other issues together. So, so we started being quite active on that, and again, as I mentioned, in California, we had the right of the voters to make certain decisions. So in 1995, there was an initiative we had been working on other initiatives to legalize all of hemp, but we weren't getting enough signatures to get it on the ballot. And in 1995, people said, well, let's just do one just about the medical use of marijuana. And we found out that people were afraid of marijuana, but one of the things that was very powerful for us was people are more afraid of other things than marijuana. One of the things people were afraid of is that someday they may be sick and they may need marijuana for their medicine, or someone in their family may need it, and that they won't be able to get it. And so they may not care about somebody else going to jail for smoking a joint for fun, but when it comes to when their family needs it, that's the moment that people really understand how important it is to have access to cannabis. So I think that the other thing I want to bring up at this point is that we got our first hemp bill introduced in 1991. We got another one introduced in 1995 by the state legislatures, not by the voters. And we've been making progress on that. Right now, there are 32 states that have industrial hemp. And when the industrial hemp issue came forward, that's how we found out it was really a very good decision on our part not to just pick one political party and work with it, but to aim for everybody. Because Mitch McConnell, who's the head of the U.S. Senate right now, is a person I have very little respect for. I think he's betraying the country by allowing Trump to do the things he's doing right now. He betrayed the country by not allowing Obama to appoint a Supreme Court justice. He's betrayed the country by blocking all these different bills that were introduced under the Obama administration. He's a pretty sleazy scum of a guy, if you ask me. But he's also from Kentucky. And Kentucky, as I said, was famous for its hemp. And so because we were able to build such a support in the state of Kentucky for hemp, that in order for him to keep getting elected, he had to eventually become pro-hemp, just to show that he was tied to the people of Kentucky. And so then in 2014, we got a bill into the U.S. Spending bill in the Congress, and we got some senators to introduce a section that said that they would change the definition of hemp to allow farmers to grow for industrial use by making it 0.3% THC in the plant. And so up to this point, we've been importing the hemp from all over the world, but we couldn't grow any in the United States, except for in 1994, we had a crop that the DEA came in and eradicated, and then some Indians grew some in White Plume Lakota Reservation in one of the Dakotas, and the DEA came and destroyed that. And in fact, just last year, another Indian tried again to grow it, and the DEA came in and wiped out their crop. But it was a little different, though, when the DEA got the announcement that the federal government had changed the definition of marijuana to move hemp out of it and to allow for cultivation of hemp. They decided they would do what they usually do, which is to ignore the law and do what they want. And so they issued something that said that they still had the authority to go after hemp. And as it turned out, that was enough to get Mitch McConnell pretty upset, because he was in favor of this particular bill. And so McConnell himself has actually turned out to be a very big ally of all the horrible, horrible things he's done. He's been good on this one particular issue of hemp. And when the DEA came and tried to shut down the hemp program in Kentucky, it was our arch conservatives who came forward and stopped that from happening and cut into the DEA's budget for the first time. for doing what they were doing. So as a result, though, the hemp industry has basically grown off of imported hemp in the United States. And in 1937, the magazine came out and said that hemp would be the first billion-dollar crop in the United States if the federal government didn't ban it, which, of course, they did, of course, ban it. So what's interesting right now is that there's about $688 million of hemp businesses in the United States. And I wanted to go a little bit of the breakdown for the way that they laid out in terms of the way that they're being sold. But about 43%, I should put on my glasses for this, I'll be reading you numbers upside down. 43% of it is from the seed oil, because it turns out to be the easiest thing to process. You can grow the plants, get the seed, press the oil out of it, and you've got something you can already use. 24% of that goes into personal care items, and 19% goes into food items. Now, as you may recall, or maybe you didn't know this, but Australia, they banned the use of hemp seed in food until just this year. They've turned around and they're starting to allow it back in. But in the United States, the DEA also tried to shut down hemp foods. And the organization I was working with, the Hemp Industries Association, we sued them because in order to do that, they had to change the definition of marijuana to include hemp foods. And unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, even though they've given the DEA broad authority, they did not give them the authority to change the definition of hemp. So we were to stop them on that particular issue because of fighting over that. And then when I wrote my book in 1997 called Hemp for Health, my second book, I said that we should be using industrial hemp to get CBD for medical purposes out, and people were pretty upset with me for saying that. The people who were in the marijuana movement said, no, marijuana for medicine means THC. We don't want just CBD marijuana. And the people in the hemp industry said, well, don't say drugs, the medicine from hemp, because we're saying it's not a drug. So a lot of people were very worried when I published that book. But in fact, right now, 19% of of that $688 million is from CBD products, and 4% are from food supplements that are related to CBD. So in fact, it's actually turned out to be a very powerful part of the process. And a lot of farmers who are growing hemp, you can only grow it for research purposes right now in the U.S., but you can still market the CBD that you get from it. And so they're growing it and trying to relearn how do you make the textile products and so forth. But in the meantime, it's the CBD medicinal products that are supporting the industry to a large extent. And then we have the industrial uses are about 18%, and we don't have car body parts like what they're doing in Holland and so forth, but we're getting some of that stuff. And then 4% is textiles, which is actually a big achievement for us because we've removed most of our textile mills from the United States, so there's not a whole lot of it there. And then the other remaining 2% is other, and I think that means building materials, because this is one area where right now we've got 32 states that have some marijuana law that allows for hemp to be produced. And the problem is that we don't have infrastructure to do anything with it. And so one of the important things is that the two things that you don't need the infrastructure for are for the seed oil products and for the construction material products. And so these are the two areas that we see moving forward. Right now there are 16 states that have industrial hemp programs going under the federal law that was passed just a couple of years ago. So it gives you an idea of how fast we've moved forward in the past 2 or 3 years. We've gotten it on the ground in 16 states, and that doesn't even include California, which we just passed our law last year to legalize marijuana, and it also allows for industrial hemp. But we actually had a hemp law before that, but it said you had to get a license from the federal government, and the federal government hasn't issued those licenses since the 1950s. So under the new law that was passed by the voters, it took away the requirement for federal approval, so people could just go ahead. And that brings us essentially to, Mikki's going to be talking to you about the medical. Kind of trying to break it up a little bit. We both talk about all sorts of stuff, you know. Being a husband and wife, and we both try to talk at the same time, we argue, so it's not to spare you that. But in any case, got a lot of progress we've been making in these past few years, and with the voter initiative last year, we got rid of that requirement for the DEA license for farmers to grow, and it also allows people to just grow marijuana for themselves. In your home, you can have 6 plants. You can grow. You can have an ounce of marijuana flowers at any time. You can have 8 grams of concentrate at any time. That's per adult. 6 plants is per household. And our medical marijuana program, and I guess Mikki's going to talk to you more about that. But basically, well, she says, I'll give you the legal jump on it a little bit, which is that California took a very strange approach to medical marijuana. Because when we passed our initiative, we didn't pass it to make it legal. We passed it to make a court defense that who get caught with marijuana, that they're using it for medical purposes. And so what that means is that if you're very sick, you can get arrested still, and you can go to court and you can defend yourself. And you can still go to jail if the jury doesn't agree with you, or the judge doesn't give you your arguments in court. So as a result of that, as soon as we passed it, immediately the police decided they did not want to respect it. And so I got the opportunity to become a marijuana expert witness in the courts and testify on behalf of people. I'm not an attorney, but I train attorneys because I helped to write that initiative a little bit. I helped to pass it more than to write it. And then there's another law that we created 7 years later that creates a legal defense. It didn't make it legal, but it gave us a defense in court for people who are caught selling marijuana, that it could be for medical purposes. It gave us for people who are growing large amounts, for people who grow together in collective gardens and things like that. But it didn't quite make it legal. It just made a legal defense. And so we've been in the courts battling this out for the past 20 years now, and we've had a lot of good success. It's been difficult for the prosecutors to send people to prison for medical marijuana on account of this, the way the laws have worked there. But then 2 years ago, there was a deal that was cut out between law enforcement and the farming communities and the legislature, which was to get rid of that medical defense and replace it with a system of licensing, so that in the future, either you have a license or else what you're doing is going to be, well, a year ago it was a felony, but now the voters changed it to misdemeanors. But it would still be illegal if you don't have a license. And the problem is that you have to have a state and a local license, and the local governments don't like this idea very much. They're even if they're in favor of marijuana, it's like they want marijuana to be legal someplace else, so that you can't have it around them. And so we've had this situation where for the past 2 years they've been developing a system where we have a new bureau that's in charge of making medical marijuana available. And to a large extent, what this is adding up to is they're making it more and more expensive because they're requiring everyone to get permits. Everyone has everything licensed, tested. Everything has to be packaged according to so-and-so. Everything has to be inspected over and over again. You have to get your local permits and so forth. What they've done right now is to add the price of about $10 a gram to the price of marijuana by what they're doing right now. $500 a pound. A pound is $4.54. Oh, $1 a gram. Okay, about $1 a gram in additional. That's much better. Because we're only paying like $10 a gram anyway, or less. So they've added about $1 a gram in expenses to make it, the marijuana at the very base level, and then of course once you make it expensive at the beginning, the retailers and the wholesalers, everyone charges more, and so it could end up making things a lot more expensive than they should have been. So we're really going to count on people being able to grow and give it away to your friends for non-medical purposes. That's the way a lot of medical patients are actually going to be ending up getting access to it. And so, as I said, so this agency that's been created to license the medical, a lot of that was really just a deal because the police wanted to make sure that you can't go into court with these legal arguments we've had before. So it's going to be very harsh in a certain way, but the penalties are going to be less, and then there's a lot of things that are legal that were illegal before. So we're in a bit of a quandary situation there, but mostly our problem in California is that we're ready to move forward very fast and very strongly at this point, accepting that we don't know what's going to happen with the federal government because Trump has appointed really bad people to very important positions. The policies that they have stated since his election do not agree with what he said before the election. Believe it or not, he may have been lying. And so you know, we're having to deal with that whole thing, and we also don't know what's going to happen at the local levels, because in order to follow the law in the state, you have to file certain paperwork and so forth. And then if the federal government comes after you, they could be able to take that same paperwork and use it against you in federal court to send you to prison. And we're talking about serious prison sentences, 20 years, 40 years, life sentences that you can get. We even have the death penalty for marijuana in the United States. So it could be really ugly. At the same time, with the big wave of support right now, we've got more than 60% support nationally for legalizing marijuana completely in the U.S. So it might be difficult for them to send people to prison because the juries might rebel. We haven't seen that before. But the other thing is that we're in a delicate dance, because if this administration starts going anti-marijuana, then that's going to help get the vote out against them at the next election. So what we think is really going to happen, and I shouldn't say we because my wife will disagree with me probably, but there's 3 different ways things could be going on this area of it. Hemp is safe. We don't have to worry about hemp right now. We just have to grow hemp and get the industry going. Medical marijuana is relatively safe. Personal use, the federal government cannot make the states that legalize personal use, and there are 8 such states right now, that cannot overturn that and make it illegal. But what they can do is they can go after the people who are getting licenses to sell it. And so if that's the case, then we have a different aspect that comes to mind, which is in the U.S. we have the 5th Amendment to the Constitution that says you can't be forced to give testimony against yourself. And so if that's the case, then these state programs that do the licensing may not be able to enforce their people getting those licenses because it violates the 5th Amendment. And so that's going to create a whole other thing where now we have a new bunch of legal arguments in court, but we don't really want the legal arguments in court. We'd rather just have legal marijuana, legal hemp, and people that have access to it for medical use. And so I'm sure I have more to say, but right now why don't I go ahead and get my wife up here so I give you a little change of tone of voice here. The lovely Mikki Norris.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for coming, and thank you to the Dublin Hemp Museum for sponsoring our talk here. And thank you, Brian, for all your help in organizing this. Okay, this looks good. Wow. Some of this was really depressing to me, to come here, hear Tom say how you're going backwards, and there is a lot of negative stuff going on in the United States, even though we have a lot of positive energy going towards the cannabis movement. The drug war still rages on, and we're still the #1 incarcerator in the world because of our drug laws and the way that they still arrest and send people to prison for mandatory minimums at the federal level, and also at some of the state level too. But I want to talk about some of the positive stuff that's going on here. And my first impression of being in Ireland, which was getting off of the Airlink bus and seeing posters for social justice meetings and seeing petitioners on the corners for different things, for progressive causes, it gave me a lot of hope for what the people can do and what the people can achieve. And we've seen what the people can do and achieve in the U.S. and in California, specifically where we live. And I guess I'll start, Brian asked that I talk about medical marijuana, and every day we're hearing more and more about new uses for the cannabis plant. We're not learning about not just THC, but now CBD, and now we're hearing that terpenes may have the cannabinoid, or that's not even a cannabinoid, right? The terpene, it's the smell that creates the smell that also may have some medical benefit as well. And all together, synergistically, they work in such a positive way that we're finding new uses for the plant. And because of that, we're finding more and more people are very much in favor of using cannabis. It's very exciting in California. You know, never before had I seen so many people demand medical cannabis. We see senior citizens are the... Do you call older people here senior citizens too? Okay. We saw concessions or something like that at the museums. But anyway, seniors are really demanding cannabis. They're opening up. In the past they had been against it, but now more and more people see that it's very useful for chronic pain, for arthritis, for insomnia, for glaucoma, for cancer and Parkinson's and MS and appetite and depression and all these things that afflict older people as they get older, and they want it. And my older sisters, all their friends who never before used cannabis, are now going to doctors and getting their doctor's notes. And if you have a doctor's recommendation in California, you can go to one of more than 1,000 places, a dispensary, and buy all kinds of products, topicals, vape pens, a whole
cornucopia
display of flowers and concentrates and shatter and waxes and oils and people are enjoying topicals as well to put on their skin with cannabis and with the THC that they're finding is helping with some of their pain and things, and tinctures and drinks and edibles and candy, gummy bears and different things. It's unbelievable. Well, it's not that unbelievable because cannabis itself, I think, inspires a lot of creativity in people, and they're using it in this way to develop a whole new industry, lots of different products. So it's very exciting, and that's one group, the seniors. And then we're finding like all these stories of these children with epilepsy who are finding that they're able to manage these horrible seizures all day long using cannabis, either with THC or CBD or a combination. And their parents are demanding it, and they're going to the legislatures and they're telling their stories, and we're watching the videos of people who you can see that cannabis is helping. And that's so important that people come out and tell their stories. That is probably the most important thing you can do to help change the minds of people. Tell your stories. And people go to city councils and talk to their representatives and go to their Congress people and representatives and tell them how it's useful for them. And people like that. And as Chris said, there's 61% support now for legalization overall, but there's 88% support for medical in the U.S. So that's very encouraging. And then we have the veterans groups that are coming back from war and with all their injuries and with their post-traumatic stress disorders. And they're demanding to use cannabis and finding really good results and using less or fewer pharmaceuticals. And now we're hearing from people with opioid addictions that, you know, they're sick of taking all these pills, and some of them have tremendous side effects, whereas cannabis side effects are very benign in comparison, mostly like dry mouth and cotton mouth and things like that. I mean, we're bombarded on TV with all these ads for pharmaceuticals. I don't know if you get them here. No, but there we get so many different pharmaceutical drugs for different things, and they list a whole list of terrible side effects, including being fatal. And if you're pregnant, you shouldn't be around this drug, and if different things like that. And the cannabis, in comparison, is very benign, so that's a good thing. And then we're finding that people who use opiates can get off of a lot of opiates or use less of it. And that's a very positive thing, because right now in the U.S. we're having a lot of problems with overdoses with the opiates. And then we're finding people who want to get off alcohol, and they're switching to cannabis, a lot of them. So even in states like Colorado that legalized it in 2012, they're finding that there's less alcohol use and a little bit more cannabis use. So that's good. So it's all very encouraging. Right now we have 29 states that allow for medical use of cannabis, and 16 more or so. Every day it kind of changes, and getting on board with the CBD. Some of them in the more conservative states only allow CBD cannabis preparations, but we have 29 states that are going to allow with THC and other things. And there's a whole variety of modes of regulation that we're seeing. California has probably the loosest until next year, although it still might be pretty loose compared to other states. So what we have in California is you go to a doctor, you get a recommendation. There's lots of doctors that specialize in cannabis recommendations, and many of them will give it to anybody 18 and older who requests one. As long as you can say you got some medical need, they'll say, okay, I'll give you your doctor's recommendation, and then you can take it and you can grow your own at home, or you can go to a dispensary and buy it. And so California, it was really developing kind of organically. In 1996, it was only a single caregiver can grow for their patient, or a patient could grow for themselves. And then, as Chris mentioned, in 2003, we had some legislation that enabled people to grow collectively and exchange money for it and get paid for their time and their expenses and things like that. But in 2015, the legislature decided it's time to regulate the market. So they came in and they've come up with about 17 different licenses that cultivators can get. And it's anywhere from small, medium, large, indoor, outdoor, mixed light, things like that. Manufacturing licenses that would include different kind of oils, and also tinctures or edibles as well. And there's going to be some restrictions on the edibles, that they have to be labeled to be 10 milligrams THC or less, so you know what your dose is, because we learned that one from Colorado when people were going into the stores and feeling like, oh, here's a chocolate candy bar, and it really, that chocolate candy bar could be about 16 or 18 doses, and they think like, oh, it tastes good, I'm going to eat the whole thing, and they were not happy with that. And I don't know, I personally am an edible user myself. At night I like to use it to help me sleep. And I have overdosed because I didn't know what was in this thing, this cookie or this brownie or the drink or whatever. How much do you take? You don't know. So now it's going to be regulated to 10 milligrams, which is pretty average kind of dose. And if you need more, you could take 2. And if you need less, take half of it. But I welcome that kind of regulation. There's going to be all kinds of regulations in terms of pesticide use. There's going to be labeling requirements as well, so people know what's in it. The different things, they're going to be testing all the cannabis that goes through, so people will know what the cannabinoid profile is, as well as other ingredients in the cannabis preparations or edibles and things like that. And There will be some restrictions on the pesticide use as well. There have been, because it's been kind of a Wild West situation in California, there's been a lot of environmental damage done to places, public lands, where people were setting up some grows and making a mess of the land, or taking water from the streams. So that's all going to be regulated. It's going to be highly regulated. And then in last year, we decided to, the voters of California decided to take that regulation for the medical and extend it to all adults 21 and older. Now the medical is for 18 and older, where anybody can go to a doctor, and like I said, the doctors are very willing to give a doctor's note, because they think that jail is much worse for you than cannabis would be any day. So they're willing to write a note to protect you, so that you can possess cannabis and you can grow it as well. And so then there's other states that are not as open. Oh, but let me go back to the 18 and older. You can get your own, and if you're under 18, if you're with parental permission, then you can also use cannabis. So we're finding that people with the kids who have epilepsy, who have autism, who have ADHD, if they're hyperactive and they need to focus, it helps calm a lot of these kids down, and then they could function better in school. And so whatever else people find that they could use cannabis for, it's been really, it's been a successful program. And fortunately, a lot of this turned nationally, the opinion turned nationally when we had Sanjay Gupta. Does that ring a bell? I don't know if any of you saw that special on CNN. That really made a difference, where he apologized, and he said he was wrong about cannabis, that he was sorry for all this bad information that he put out. And when he came out and started showing people who are really benefiting from cannabis use for medical purposes, that really helped to change the public opinion as well. But I can't emphasize enough that it is the personal story that is so important, that people need to come out of the closet. They need to go out and talk to people about how cannabis is useful to them, because generally people are compassionate and want to help keep you from going to jail, and want it themselves if they think that they could benefit from cannabis, or somebody in their family could too. So, and the personal story also, Chris and I wrote a book. We had a project called Human Rights in the Drug War started in '95 for the 50th anniversary of the United Nations, where we decided that we should show cannabis as prisoners of conscience for the 50th anniversary of the United Nations. And we started showing the faces of people in prison and how it impacts their families and destroys their lives and things like that. And that became a book that we wrote called Shattered Lives, Portraits from America's Drug War. But that also, by telling the stories of people who had been impacted by the drug war, that also has helped to gain a lot of sympathy and get people to think that maybe the drug war and the way we're fighting it and just sending it to people in prison isn't the way to go. So I encourage you, I don't know what your situation here in Ireland is, if a lot of people are getting arrested and serving long prison sentences for drugs. Are they? Yeah?
Not really. No.
Not really. So you're in a much better condition than we are. But we have about 500,000 people in prison on drug offenses in the U.S. So, you know, it was very important that we got out and started showing the faces and turning public opinion against the way we're fighting the drug war. But as Chris mentioned, we now have an Attorney General that wants to bring it back. Barack Obama issued, his Justice Department issued a memo that said to start relaxing in the way that we're charging people, and you don't have to say that. Well, right now on the books, for example, 100 plants could get you an automatic 5 years in prison. That's a mandatory sentence. It doesn't matter what the motive was or anything. It doesn't even matter if you have the actual drugs or money, because hearsay evidence was good enough, and the way conspiracy laws work, if you know somebody and they say you were involved, you can still be part of the conspiracy and get long prison sentences. But Barack Obama was starting to turn that around a bit, and he issued lots of clemencies to people when he was president. But now we have Jeff Sessions as our Attorney General, and he now just recently issued another memo that says for prosecutors to go for the most serious offense they can get on these people. He's a drug warrior. He does not like marijuana. He thinks people who smoke marijuana are not good people. And in fact, he said that I don't know if this was a joke or not, it might not be, but that he liked the people in the KKK until he found that they were smoking marijuana. But I don't think that, I find it hard to believe they were smoking marijuana, because smoking marijuana tends to make people more compassionate and more interested in social justice and the environment. As one of our senators, a Republican senator, Orrin Hatch, said, you know how you can tell your kid is using marijuana is because all of a sudden they're interested in social justice and the environment. Hey. You know the KKK? You know the KKK. Ku Klux Klan.
The IRA?
I don't know. So anyway, so we've had lots of years, and we're still getting more states getting on board with medical marijuana. And on election night last November, we got 4 more states to join the medical marijuana. And some of the states are much more regulated than California. I mean, in California, you could grow as a patient, you could grow, let's say, 100 square feet and whatever. I don't know, do you know feet still? Yeah? Okay. Not just metric system. We're still behind on that one. Where patients can grow in for their own personal use. And there are some states where the patients cannot grow for their own personal use, and where the cultivation is very regulated, only allowing a certain number of cultivators and a certain number of dispensaries and only a certain number of conditions. Whereas California, we are lucky because we had a doctor, Todd Mikaria, who had enough foresight to add in our law a line that says that people can use medical marijuana for this, and any other condition for which may cause great relief. So that was very good, because it opened it up for anything that people could use medical marijuana for. Now, so we got on election night, we got Florida, we got North Dakota and Arkansas, and these are all red states. These are all states that voted for Trump. So we're finding that it's not really necessarily a blue and red or Democratic Republican issue. Everybody wants medical marijuana now, and I think it's more popular than Trump. So that was the good news on election night. And Chris and I, we had been working on this issue since, he said, 1988, so it was a culmination for us of 28 years of working on this issue, and we were like, yay, we got it! And then we got Trump at the same time, so it was like the most bipolar night of my life, and it was very weird. And but I think I think it's got a lot of momentum, and the legalization does, and it's now in California, it's creating what we're called a green rush. People are coming into the States. They see big potential for making lots of money, lots of jobs, and you know, these people who never had any interest in cannabis before, when they see that that it's going to be pretty open, and people will be able to get all different kinds of licenses. I mentioned most of them, but I forgot to mention retail licenses as well. And then the cities will have a lot of determination whether or not they want to allow commercial or not. But every household will be allowed to grow their 6 plants. Now, some of it might be it might be restricted to just indoor 6 plants. But if they don't have a law against it, then people can grow outdoor in a greenhouse, or however they want to grow it. But we're still finding some obstacles there. The federal government is an obstacle, but they cannot close us down, as Chris mentioned. That's the good news. But right now, it's all cash transactions because the banks don't want to deal with cannabis businesses because it's still a Schedule I drug up there with heroin and other drugs that probably shouldn't be in there. Whereas even cocaine and methamphetamine are considered Schedule II. So marijuana is considered more dangerous at the moment than cocaine and methamphetamine, which is ridiculous. But so people, it's still very much a cash business, but it is creating a lot of jobs in the security industries. So people are going to protect, the money that's coming in, and the businesses cannot make a lot of the deductions that a normal business would be able to make, because it's considered a money laundering operation even at the federal level, not at the state. Now, some of the states are looking at ways of dealing with this, like maybe opening up a state bank or credit unions, but we're seeing a lot of, there's just so much interest in the industry and so much potential. They estimated that in California that we could raise about $1 billion of taxes each year from the sale of cannabis. And that money will be going to specified things, like a lot of it's going to youth programs to help with after-school programs or counseling or different programs that will help young people advance in their lives. Unfortunately, with Prop 64, our legalization bill, they also made it so that people under 18, if they get caught with cannabis and get in trouble with it or possessing it or even selling it, they will not get a criminal record, which is a good thing. They'll have to do a drug education course or counseling plus community service, and then when they turn 18, they won't have a criminal record. It'll be washed clean. And then a lot of the money is going to environmental restoration, and some of the money is going to law enforcement, and then there's designated monies to determine what is impaired driving. Not a blood standard, which is meaningless because we know that a lot of people who use cannabis can drive fine and without being impaired. In fact, a lot of the people who use a lot of cannabis, they don't even feel high anymore practically, and they're not driving impaired. So the California Highway Patrol is going to be coming up with a standard to determine what is impairment. So that's a good thing. there might be a glut. There's so many people who want to get involved in this industry that it might be too many people that are already getting involved with it. And people are concerned that some of the people who traditionally have been involved in bringing us cannabis all these years, the small growers might have a hard time surviving in the new market in a regulated, licensed scheme. But there are places like in Humboldt County and Mendocino County are big producing, cannabis producing areas are starting to form cooperatives and trying to figure out a way for them to survive in this new system. So that's exciting because we all want them to survive as well. So we have now 8 states that have legalized it. California in 2018 is when the licenses will start being issued. So come to California next year and I'm sure we'll find some places where you can use it or buy it. And hopefully in our law we also made it so that a city can issue a permit for on-site consumption. So hopefully we'll have places like coffee shops, like the Dutch coffee shops, which was our inspiration in the beginning. We thought, that's a good system, that works. You know, people can buy cannabis at a reasonable price, and we expect the price to go down even with all the taxes and all the fees and the licenses, because the scale is going to go up, and how much cannabis is produced, and that should bring it down. And we think it should be a lot more affordable than it is right now. It shouldn't have to be that expensive. Somebody said that there are 10,000 retailers already in California, but I think that's a high number. We know there's a few thousand, but not sure how many. And then there's going to be a license where people can do everything from growing it to manufacturing it to selling it as well. So we're excited about the future of cannabis in the U.S., despite the negativity of the Trump and the uncertainty. But I think the future is very bright for cannabis, and we're hoping that it's going to have, you know, a wave of influence around the rest of the world. I mean, California is the 6th largest economy in the world. And if we do it right, hopefully we're going to lose our excuses. At the international level, there's still these treaties out there, anti-cannabis, pro-drug war treaties, but what I've seen from the U.S., we kind of pick and choose which treaties we want to follow or not. And in Congress, we now have a cannabis caucus of representatives from different states that want to support the cannabis laws. And there's going to be, so now we have California, we've got Washington State, Oregon, Alaska, so we have the whole west coast of the U.S. is cannabis friendly. We've got Nevada, and we've got Maine and Massachusetts and Colorado. So those will be all places, if you are a cannabis tourist, it would be nice to go and visit those states that will be more friendly to you than some of the other states. We like cannabis tourism. We like meeting cannabis activists from all over the world. We tend to think that cannabis are some of the nicest, most intelligent, compassionate, creative, hard-working, productive people that you meet. And I started a project years ago called the Cannabis Consumers Campaign, where I have a website where I ask people to come out of the closet so we can show our faces and show that we are good people and that we need to help them lose the excuse for prohibition to continue And that's only going to happen if we're brave and we come out and start talking to people. And if you don't want to do it very publicly, then at least talk to people close to you and let them know how cannabis benefits your life. And I think that's also going to have a very good influence. Looking at the gay rights model, when people were in the closet, gay people had very few rights, and when they started coming out and people saw, oh, my cousin, my nephew, my co-worker is gay, and they're great people and they should have all the same rights as everybody else. So I think it's an important step that we all need to do, and I know it can be dangerous, but it can also be our way of gaining our rights. So I think that's good for now, and if you have some questions, we're happy to answer some questions for you, and thank you.
Thanks very much to all our speakers. If I could maybe ask Tom to just come back up here for the Q&A. So if anyone has a question, they can raise their hand. I've got a couple of questions myself. We can get the ball rolling that way. And then if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll come along to you. So I suppose I'll just start by asking you, Tom, since you spoke first and you can speak a bit about the Irish context. I suppose you spoke a bit about being on the ground, so to speak, for a long time, about the growing. But I suppose I was just wondering, when it did start to come out, what was the reaction in the community, both from your neighbours and also, police enforcement and other individuals like that? Were they shocked? Were they welcoming? I'm just quite interested. What was the response from the community when they did find out what you'd been doing for so long?
Bend down a little bit. It was varied. I mean, to be honest, because we live in a country area in South Wicklow, and because so many people were coming in and out of the house with Mary, giving Mary care because of her condition, a lot of people knew it. I mean, I live in a farming community. I'm not from that background. We just happen to have a cottage in a farming community. And there was a lot of curiosity around when it got out. I mean, this was maybe 10 years ago that it got out. And some of the most conservative people realised the benefits that Mary got from it. So there was no surprise to them. And I have no doubt that the community police or the guards in our club, which would be our local station, knew what we were doing, but they didn't have a difficulty with it. The surprise, I suppose, came from the reaction when it became public. And the way it became public was that in the last couple of years of Mary's life, she was writing a book. And the book, she signed the publishing contract and everything, but unfortunately never got to see the book because she died before it hit the shops. And part of the book, which I suppose may have caused a bit more problem if she was still alive when the book was published, was part of the book was how we had been growing cannabis for a long time, how we came about finding out about it, and particularly Mary, because Mary never used cannabis when she was much younger, which is something that I certainly can't say. But the reaction of that was quite surprising, even to the extent that the media seemed to take more interest in that particular paragraph because it was sensational than any other. And I remember being on News Talk with a particular doctor talking about just that, about a month after the book hit the shops. And he castigated me, for giving, as he put it himself, giving a dangerous drug to a very ill person. And he suggested that Mary's life was shortened by it. And in fact, I mean, Mary and I knew, and our whole family know, that Mary would have died many years beforehand if it wasn't for cannabis. Apart from the relief that it gave her, because of her other, I suppose, interest, which you probably all know about, which was her right to die in our case to the High Court, Supreme Court hearing, she would have made that decision because she would have been in agony and she would have had a very, very uncomfortable life, and she would have made that decision long before she actually died. So there is no doubt, and I've said this before, that there are two drugs that kept Mary alive. One of them was her Nembutal, which was her end-of-life drug, which was her insurance, and the second was cannabis. But the reaction, it was only then when people gave me the opportunity to speak about it, and because other people came forward as well, that I suppose the public were a bit more understanding of it, and that's something that for the last 3.5 years I've been trying to get out there. But the reaction at first was quite strong, and I think there's a difference here in what the public see or think about cannabis. And just like ourselves, just 25 years ago, it never occurred to me that cannabis was a medicine. And I think that's the situation with an awful lot of people here. The public still have the attitude, and particularly the medical profession, still have the attitude that cannabis is a dangerous drug, because that's what it's classed as. And it's that sort of thing that we have to get over here in Ireland before we're going to make any progress.
Thanks very much, Tom. I suppose I just have a question for Chris. Chris, you worked and edited Jack Herrera's book, and I suppose a lot of people here would know Jack. I suppose sadly he passed away before a lot of the reforms happened. So I suppose if you could maybe just talk a little bit about Jack, and also how you think he might have reacted to a lot of the recent changes in various states such as California.
That's a pretty good question. I did work with Jack quite a bit, and one of the things about Jack is he was very obstinate about his views on things. Jack, he believed that a couple of things. The first, he believed that only going through the voters was the only way that we would ever get reform, which pretty much turned out to be the way that we did get the reforms going. The other thing was that he took an interesting attitude from my perception, because he felt that the worse things are, the more people want to change, and so that you don't fix things bit by bit, but you let it stay bad until such point as people rise up and change it. My opinion has been somewhat different on that I definitely believe that you need to find your openings and make incremental gains, get a new foothold, and then you're in a better position to take the next step forward. And so that was one thing about Jack, that he had a strong opinion about this. For example, when the medical marijuana initiative came out in 1995, he was against it. He said the sick people are the ones who people have most sympathy for. So if you get rid of them, then that leaves people who aren't sick, and then people don't feel sorry for you anymore, and it's going to be harder to get legalization from there on. And in a certain way, that did come back to be the problem, not because of exactly what he said there, but because of the fact that once we had the medical community protected, there were people within that community who thought as long as they were protected, they didn't really care about other people, or that somehow it would be worse for them if other people were protected. So we had quite a fight on that issue. One of the things, though, about Jack is the guy was like a freight train. He was just pounding away. I never saw anybody put as much energy day in and day out to the legalization movement as he did, giving his speeches. He was extremely motivating, especially to young people. You get them very excited about getting involved in the issue and moving forward. But when you say about what would Jack think about things now, I know that, like I said, at a certain point he would be saying, well, we don't have everything, so therefore we didn't do enough. But on the other hand, Jack was also somewhat practical. For example, with the medical marijuana initiative on the ballot, he was against it until we started to get it on the ballot. So when we were saying he felt like the argument was, do we legalize everything all at once, or do we get medical? Whereas a lot of us thought, well, do we get medical, or do we just let nothing happen for another 5 to 10 years? And so, but once it got on the ballot, though, Jack changed his position, and he became a very strong supporter of the initiative, Prop 215. When it was 2010, which is the year he died before that initiative ever made the ballot. So he was still saying, this isn't enough, this isn't good enough. And then he died. And so I've always felt that the big problem there really was that if he had lived long enough to see it on the ballot, he would have said, we have to vote for this because it's going to get people out of prison. But because he died before that happened, he was still saying, this isn't perfect, it's not about everything we want. And so a lot of people got this negative impression that he would be against it. But I don't think so. I really think that from what I've seen and what I saw of Jack over the years, he would fight very hard for his position, but then once it was when he would never vote to keep people in prison for marijuana. And so I think ultimately he would have been in favor of the changes that happened. But he'd be complaining about it right now. He would still be saying, wait, it's not perfect. and I agree with them that it's not perfect. We still have a lot to do. And in fact, one of the things that is impressive to me with our current law that we passed last November is it set out a whole platform for how it all works very clearly. Now, this year when the legislature opened up, they put in 43 bills to change it. 41 of those were to make it more restrictive and more limited. And so that's something that I just find it amazing that, because the things that I see wrong with it are that it didn't get rid of enough penalties. We should be getting rid of more penalties. We should make it easier for people. But when the legislature gets their chops on it, they just want to make it more strict. And I think that it really shows that we've got this problem with law enforcement has too much power in the United States. I don't know how things work here in that regard, if you have that situation. But like I said, the main thing with Jack is he was such a passionate person that he would inspire people in a way that very few other people could. And so I miss the guy. I miss fighting with him. I miss agreeing with him. Both. So if you ever get a chance to read The Emperor Wears No Clothes, I designed and edited the book. And we spent a lot of time fighting about the book itself. So what you see is part Jack and part me when you read that book.
And I suppose I'll just ask the question to Mikki, and then we can open it up to the audience. You spoke a bit about the arrests and how that affects people. I suppose in Ireland, currently about 40 people a day are arrested for personal possession cases, whether it's for cannabis or other drugs, and obviously that can have a quite life-changing effect. But you mentioned something about people even getting the death penalty in America for cannabis. I assume that was under the 3 strikes and out or other systems. Could you maybe talk a bit about the policing and how that has started to change? Are we starting to see less arrests in the States where it has been regulated, or are we still getting the communities that were heavily affected beforehand still getting affected, and those who are getting away still getting away? Or how much have things changed? Thanks.
As I mentioned, the drug war still is being fought. It's being fought more harshly in African American and Latino communities. The way that people are arrested has to do with the way that they're enforcing the laws, and a lot of it has been in the street, and some of those people will get harsher sentences, and that's why when we were working on Prop 64, the California legalization initiative called the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, we were able to get the support of the NAACP, which is our big organization that stands for the rights of African Americans, because they thought that it's going to help slow down a lot of the arrests. And we are seeing a slowing down of cannabis arrests. And a lot of places are starting to pass decriminalization measures as well to get rid of the jail sentences for simple possession anyway. We don't know what's going to happen because things are still unfolding now. The federal government has passed a bill to not allow the federal government to spend any money on enforcing the laws against medical marijuana in the states that have the laws. So that's good. A lot of the people are still getting arrested for, I guess, crack and other things as well. They had, last I heard, I think this might have come down a bit, it was about 1.5 million drug arrests a year. Not just marijuana. Marijuana, until a few years ago, we were having about 800,000 arrests a year. But now it's down, I think, in the 600,000. So we're seeing a decrease, which is good news. We still have the mandatory minimum sentences, as I mentioned, at the federal level. the states are starting to pass laws to lessen the drug war because they're seeing that it has failed. The drug war really has not achieved what it was what it was set out to do, which was to reduce drug use and make it less available. And now drugs are more available than it ever was, so it has failed in its purposes. And one good sign in California, there was a prison that closed down, and now the city has issued a license to cultivate cannabis in this prison. So in some ways we're overgrowing the government in this way, which to me, I thought that was a great thing to do. But we still need to work against the drug war. Pregnant women can be a target. If they test positive for drugs, they might want to try to take a baby away or not allow them to nurse, like that. It's still very destructive, and we still have people in prison for life for marijuana charges. Not too many, but there are still some. Now, we do have the death penalty on the books, but nobody's ever been charged with that, fortunately. And for that, it would basically be an industrial hemp crop, probably, because it would be 60,000 plants or more that would trigger that, but I don't see that people are going to get... I don't see that happening, really, fortunately, from that angle. But yeah, the drug war rages on, but it's very unpopular, and I think that people are trying to look for new ways to deal with the drug issue, and hopefully it'll be still decriminalizing more and more drugs. We have a law enforcement group of former narcotics officers and judges and prosecutors who are out there as well. It's a very powerful lobby in the U.S., which it was called LEAP. It's still called LEAP, but they changed the name. It used to be Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, but now it's Law Enforcement Action Project or something like that. But it's at leap.cc, and they're a wonderful group of people. I'd like to encourage you all, if you're interested in drug policy, there's an international drug policy conference that's going to be happening in October in Atlanta, Georgia. It's sponsored by the Drug Policy Alliance, and the Drug Policy Alliance is our biggest and best funded drug policy group, and they're working on lots of aspects of human rights and harm reduction and trying to take away a lot of the harms that the drug war is creating. And so that's going to be in October, and you can see that at drugpolicy.org, and I encourage you to go. We get people from all over the world coming and discussing different ways and different programs that are being more successful than just locking people up. And most politicians even know that now, that that's not the way to treat a drug problem, is just by locking people up. So hopefully I'm optimistic, even with this new memo from our Attorney General, that I think a lot of people are tired of it. It's been waged since Nixon was president, and hopefully it'll start turning. That we keep passing more and more laws that are trying to liberalize it, but not fast enough. And I thought, when Chris and I first got involved in this issue, we thought 5 years, we could do it in 5 years. Back in 1989, we saw that it took a lot longer than that, and social change just does tend to take a lot longer than we expect, but we have to keep plugging away because it's the right thing to do.
I'm happy to open the floor up to any questions, or I can keep making them up here. But has anyone got a question? Just raise your hand and I can relay it if they can't hear it. Anybody? Question, comments? There's a mic here if you want to have a few minutes. Nobody? Surely? Virgo, any questions? He looks like a guy who has questions.
Yeah, so like with the problem like we're having over with like I think the medical campaign here is that like there is a lack of research for sure in some areas, and that's really what's coming up against the medical regulators here. And that's oftentimes an excuse. But I think that like cannabis needs to be introduced as something that's compassionate, that you shouldn't criminalize someone who chooses to use it. So how do you frame a campaign that's the message you're getting across? Because I think the message is being kind of like we're getting distracted from the real message of cannabis. So like how would you frame the kind of campaign, I guess, or how did you frame it?
So did you hear everyone hear the question? Yeah, so any of our speakers like to take that?
I think it's an excellent question, and I think the main thing that you have to realize, as I said, is that a lot of this whole campaign against cannabis is all based on fears. We all know that. And so finding out what people are afraid of is the key that made a big difference to us. And that's why getting the stories out there is really important. But when we talk about the research, though, I think that there's some good research that's being done in the U.S. California has been doing some. But likewise, Israel has been doing a lot of research. And Uruguay is actually, we were at a conference there a few years ago, and one of the things that they said is that they have so many people using like diazepine and things like that. They have one of the highest uses of diazepine in the world, which is basically to control stress and things. And so it was the first time I was at a conference where we had government people standing up and saying, "What? You mean we can use marijuana and stop people using some pharmaceutical drugs? We have to make that available as soon as possible." Because usually, for example, Trump had a meeting with the pharmaceutical drug companies, and he said he was going to be representing the American people and bringing the prices of drugs down. Well, he walked from the meeting and said, "Gee, these guys really need to make more money, so therefore we have to come up with policies that make more money for the drug companies." The opposite of what he said during the campaign, of course. But I really think that what we need to do is to have an international dialogue on it. I know that Holland is quite interested and has been making some progress. You've got the Israelis that are making progress in this issue. We've got Uruguay making progress. We've got California making progress. And so I think we're all in the same situation about one thing, though, is that even with all this, they're still not training doctors in the U.S. about how medical marijuana works or how it applies. So to that extent, I think that what we need to be framing it in terms of is this new discovery that's happened in the past 20 years, which is about the endocannabinoid system. And again, I'm presuming you guys know a lot of things, so I'm not going into a lot of fine detail about it. But just to look at the fact that again, in a way, I look at my book I wrote in 1997, Hemp for Health. What I did was I did a diagram. I said, well, cannabis helps with this part of your body and with this part of your body. But I made this chart and I said, here's where all it helps. And now, 20 years later, we've got the endocannabinoid system, and it actually shows that all those parts of the body that I said it looks like marijuana helps people with, that it's because of these internal receptors. So I think what we really need to be doing is to be reaching the medical students, make them understand that this is the future for them. They're not going to be making careers and famous names for themselves by sticking with the systems that we've got now. That they might come with an incremental change somewhere, but whoever it is who really reintroduces the endocannabinoid system, the cannabinoid profiles, the interactions of these two systems, from the scientific community's point of view, is going to be remembered for a long time in history, I think, going forward from this. Right now it's Dr. Mechulam in Israel, but I think there's bound to be some people here in this country as well. The other thing is to get the groups of the patients and the groups of the parents of patients, like the U.S., we've made a lot of progress as a result of people finding out that CBD, that particular cannabinoid, is very useful for seizures for young children. And so getting the sympathy about that, getting those stories out there, but mainly getting the young, aspiring people in the medical community to understand that not only is this something that they should know that they're not learning about, but in fact of the matter is this is the area where they can make their mark on history going forward, is going to be something that's going to be very powerful to them. Then there's also the international conferences. We're going to be at one in California just as soon as we get home, actually. Landing the plane, trying to get a little sleep and then going to a conference the next day. So bringing that kind of a conference here, I think, would be good. The other thing that, and I understand money is a problem for this, but one of the things that the Drug Policy Alliance mentioned, Drug Policy Alliance. Well, the organization Drug Policy Alliance is very effective in organizing nationally and internationally these events. And the one that's coming up in Atlanta that she mentioned, as a matter of fact, that they provide, they'll help people to come over to their conferences. What do you call them? Scholarship is the word, thank you. They're providing scholarships to fly people in. So I would say that what you really want to do at this point is you want to get some people from this room to apply for those scholarships and try to get into that, or fund it yourselves to get some people over there. Then that's going to give the opportunity to make the connections. Likewise, it's not that hard to get over to Holland and check out, talk to people at Bedrocken and see if, because they're interested in expanding their market. So they will help you with it as well. The GW Pharmaceuticals, they're kind of in a different niche because they're like the selective molecules instead of the whole plant, which I favor the whole plant, and I presume a lot of people in this room probably feel that way as well. So getting their interest in here will help you with a certain level of the medical community, but it's not going to help to achieve the goal of people being able to grow their own medicine. And the other group that I think has a lot of invested interest in this is going to be the bureaucracy in the medical community, because they're probably trying to manage these budgets of how they can take care of a lot of people in Ireland who need help. And again, so then if it can be pitched to them in such a way as by letting people have access to these collective experimental approaches to cannabis, that it's going to be saving the system from having to take as much care of people, that's going to be really good. And in particular right now, one of the issues that's being most valuable in the U.S. has to do with opioid dependencies. The fact that people who use cannabis use significantly less opioids, and not only is it helping them to prevent people from getting addictions, but it's also helping to get them off the addictions. I don't know if you have the same kind of a level of problem that we have here in the United States, but I do think that having the people in the medical system here get involved with understanding how cannabis can actually reduce these health problems is going to be very helpful. So again, just to reiterate, getting people to this international conference, trying to get somebody to do a conference here, getting the students to understand the value of this as a forward-looking process for themselves, getting the regulators to understand the value of savings to your system, to have that in the U.S. again, particularly in terms of reducing opioid use. And then the other thing finally is, of course, finding those cases that you can publicize that are going to have the greatest amount of sympathy. And so, unfortunately, you have to remember that the way people observe things in the world is not necessarily based upon reality, but it's based upon their perception. The reason I'm saying this is because we have people with intractable pain that cannabis is the only thing that can help them to maintain and function. But when people look at them, if they see a person who's functioning, then they're going to think, well, they're just pretending like they need marijuana. And so for us, the big symbol in the United States for the longest time has been a person in a wheelchair. And it's not because people in wheelchairs have additional benefits beyond other people. In some cases they do, of course. But it's because people can look at someone in a wheelchair and they know that person needs help. And when that person says, this helps me, they believe them. On the other hand, if you have somebody who's like smiling and laughing and saying, boy, I haven't had any trouble at all since I started smoking marijuana, then people are going to be thinking, well, that person, I don't know if I really believe them or not. So framing these kind of things, and so I think that if you could have some particular events where you have a day or a moment, and I'm not talking about 420, but an event where we could get people from different parts of the country to come to a national press conference, particularly if you could get it at a university or a medical center or something like that, to really focus that energy on there. And the other thing that's been very powerful for us in the U.S. has been talking about our own history of use of it. The fact that actually, the Scottish doctor W.B. O'Shaughnessy is the one who... Well, there you go. See, you got to straighten that out because people think he was Scottish.
He qualified as a doctor in Edinburgh, but he was from Limerick.
Well, there you go.
And his first patient was a child of 3 months with seizures. They knew it 175 years ago.
Exactly, and so that story has to be a very big part of the foundation of going forward too, because it's not just a matter of the future, but it's reclaiming the past too. We're not going to find solutions to our problems if we ignore the roots of those problems. And so, likewise, we're not going to make advances without looking back at our own histories and seeing these things as to how they tie in. See, this is a new thing for me. I've always heard Scottish. And so, bless your little hearts. You just waking up the truth into me. But when I get out of here, I'm going to tell people he was Irish, so there you go. But, so I think that, what you have to do is to take an overall look at what is you're trying to accomplish and what the steps are, who you need to get there. Because politicians are not usually your first answer. Just one last thing is that when I was doing a lot of organizing early on, and again, this is a little difference between Jack Hare and me. We would go and, we both speak at events, but Jack, he liked to go to speak at events and then get a group of people together, and they would be his I use the word groupies, the people who hung out, and they were just like, oh, I'm with Jack Hare. That was a group of people that were very helpful in their own way. But what happened with me is I would go and I would talk to the university professor, and then no one would know about that meeting except for me and the professor. And I would talk to the farmer, and nobody knew about that meeting but me and the farmer. And I'd talk to the agricultural board, and nobody knew about that meeting but me and the agricultural board. So I wasn't collecting a group of people, who would hang out with me. But what was really good was that after I left, then the professor, the agricultural board, and the farmer would get together and they'd talk. And they all thought the same thing because they had all talked to me beforehand. And so a lot of times, it's not the matter of trying to be the main spokesperson for the issue, as it is like you meet with the people who are going to have the long-term effect and be able to make those changes and get them onto your camp, whether people know that or not. And then the other thing that I would say from the other point of view, difference between me and Jack is Jack was much more ego-driven than I am. And so that turned out to be kind of a good thing because he loved to be out there saying controversial things and being like a lightning rod, getting all this attention. And so he would get a lot of attention. I would be doing the organizing behind it. And so, you need to have both of those people. You need the person with a strong enough ego that they want to be the person who everybody thinks this is the guy who did it. But you also have to have people who are going to be doing the quiet meetings and the organizing that's going to have the effect. One last thing is that a lot of times it's not the politician you want to talk to, it's their assistants and their aides and the up-and-coming people who are going to replace them and who are going to implement those policies. So, you might find a Justin Trudeau sort of a person who decides to say, I'm going to legalize marijuana in order to win the election in Canada, but you might just as likely find somebody like, for us, the guy who got Mitch McConnell behind Hemp, somebody we don't even know who they were, you know what I mean? It was just staff people who we kept talking to staff and bringing the information to the staff, and the staff educated him and made him move forward. So, all these different ways of working underground, creating an image, and making sure that you keep track of your history, but also look to the future. These are all things I think you have to undertake to make that happen.
Thanks very much. I suppose I'll just come in there and to defend Fergal because I kind of put him on a spot. I suppose of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. We actually have an Irish chapter here, and Fergal and I and others will be involved with that. And with regards to summits, we actually had our first medical cannabis summit, and I might get Tom to talk about this. We had our first medical cannabis summit last September. We actually had people from Israel, America, and the various other countries, and we found those events are certainly being more impactful than your usual smoke-ups or just your social events, which is how I call them. But perhaps could I bring you in there and just maybe could you mention a bit about our summit and the work of SSDP and others maybe?
I'm not sure that I need the mic because I've been shouting it for causes all my life. So, it's from the sound of that, I think we are doing things right here. Because unfortunately, they've been hijacked a little bit in the recent past. But yes, we organised this medical cannabis summit, a global medical cannabis summit, the first apparently in Europe, and it was a huge success in September last, and we're planning to have another one here. As far as the medical profession are concerned, we have organised, training sessions, which they don't even do in the States. We have people from Canada and people from Greece who are prepared to who do this already and very successfully to the medical profession, and they're prepared to come here and set up situations. We also, just last week, had a couple of our people over in Spain at a training session on cannabis for medical use. We have attended seminars all over the world. In fact, I just mentioned, and you say very rightly, that Israel have made some great strides in that. I'm attending a 3-day I've been speaking at a 3-day medical cannabis seminar in Israel, in Tel Aviv, in June. And I managed to get Simon Harris invited as well. Now, I've spoken to him, and he has a reluctance to go, but Simon Harris is our health minister. And what I'm hoping that he will do is send someone from the health committee or the HPRA or even one of his own assistants. And from that point of view, even going back to the summit, we had people from the HPRA and the health committee and the Department of Health and Social Protection all at the Global Medical Cannabis Summit. We organised a second seminar here in Dublin just in January, and that was aimed specifically at the Health Committee and the HPRA, and 50% of the people that were there were from the HPRA and the Health Committee. And the basis of that was that the bill that was there is now with them, waiting for their recommendations to come back to our Parliament for them to vote on it. Now, the recommendations that were made by the HPRA certainly weren't very favourable, but by the sound of that, it does seem as if we are doing the right things. Unfortunately, attention has been taken away because of the recent campaign that seems to be there. The advantage that this recent campaign is having is that it's making people aware. It's getting the general public to be aware. What we need to do is to capitalise on that, coming in to educate the general public as well as the people that we've been aiming at. The unfortunate thing is we're a small group of people. We don't have masses of people out there. We're a small group of people trying to work very hard for one cause.
Thanks very much, Tom. Has anyone else got questions? Sorry, I see 2 hands raised there. I'll go to Jim first and then yourself.
More a comment than a question.
Yeah, no problem. Do you want the microphone or are you happy?
No, I'm okay for here. My personal experience with the medical profession in Ireland, in one of the major hospitals, is the opposite of having to introduce it to young budding doctors because they know about it. I had occasion to be in a ward, in a bed, with 2 doctors and a staff nurse having a discussion about vaporising, and went on to another discussion. They concurred, by the way, that smoking was not, vaporising was not smoking. Like, what is vaporising? It's heating it up. It's not combustion, is it? Well, it's not really. What is it? It's a soporific. So anyway, he concurred it wasn't smoking. And then I had another visit with a staff nurse, and she liked my hemp coat. I said, oh, you sell them, nice ladies ones. And she got talking about, she knows a lot of her patients use cannabis, and she feels she should be able to prescribe it. And she named pharmaceuticals, which she described as dreadful, which she's forced to issue. Now, the issue is that we've 13 out of the world's top 15 pharmaceutical companies here, and they've grabbed that budget with the medical profession, that their fucking goods, shit, is going into the hospitals to be distributed against the will of the staff. They know better. And that's the real situation I feel on the ground. Now, the same hospital is advertising CBD on 4 public screens for me. After my visit, I gave them bars of boxes of Hemp chocolate. I got a phone call. They wanted to help local businesses. Do I want to advertise? And I said, would you advertise CBD? And the one said, oh yes, I know all about it. My son has seizures. So, I think the reality is that it's corruption of budgets. The medical
I certainly have to concur with that from my own personal experience, because our GP, and she's part of, or was part of a practice where there's about 6 doctors in it. They all knew for years that Marty was using cannabis. Also, her neurologist and the people in the neurology department that she was attending all knew that Marty was, and they were amazed at the relief that she was getting from it, to the extent that one of the nurses in the neurology department referred a lot of MS people to me to tell them about cannabis. So I certainly, there is no doubt that there is a good backing there from certain parts of the medical profession.
No, this man has some. Do you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just the interesting thing. I think it's all going very fast now. Like everything's definitely moving very fast. When I was using cannabis medically, there was very few people talking about it. So there was the only ones really in Ireland like that was talking about it was people like Horace, the guy that I used to get my medication from, Jim from the Hemp store. But it was like we were using chapters out of the Emperor Wears No Clothes and the Forbidden Medicine and a few books like this. But it was all back then when I was saying it, there was all the governments around the world were denying that this was the case. Now they're accepting it. Now they're saying in the States and all this that yeah, cannabis is good medically, and there's report after report after report coming out, right? So there's not report after report after report coming out saying cannabis is bad. So what I think should actually be happening here is like with power comes responsibility. If we vote somebody in and they become the Minister of Health, they don't just get a nice big paycheck. Well, they do, unfortunately. But what actually should be happening there, and what is there, they're bound by the same laws that we're bound by. So we have criminal law and civil law. It mightn't be criminally negligent, or it mightn't be criminal law for the minister to say to somebody, no, you can't smoke cannabis. But civil law does allow for the minister to be sued, whereby if somebody is being denying cannabis under all these false illusions that cannabis is bad and whatever else, when the rest of the world has accepted, no, here's actually the real research shows that cannabis does work. If that minister continues to keep cannabis illegal, okay, and he's sued in his own personal capacity for knowingly withholding a viable medical treatment that can actually work, that is now proven to work. How do we know? Because all these states are saying it. All we have to prove is on the balance of probability. So if somebody who's using it medically, who is in the position that I was in years ago, even better if we could get somebody, unfortunately, that needed this to keep them alive, and they sued the minister, and they won their case on the balance of probability, it would directly change the law, because if it was found in the balance of probability, yes, what this man is saying here, or what this woman is saying here, yes, this is a medical treatment, that it is a viable treatment for them, the minister then couldn't continue to leave the law that cannabis is illegal. And I think that's why, I think what the problem at the moment is that for years we've been failed by the political parties. We've been failed by the big medical industries. It's not within anybody's interest, you know what I mean? If you got, up until 10 years ago, you went to any legal team, they'd say, you're looking at big money there, you know what I mean? You get nobody to speak up for you, but times has changed. So I think is what we need to actually start doing is, it is fucking personal. If you're told you're going to die in 6 months' time from cancer, there's nothing more, excuse the language, like, but there's nothing more fucking personal than that, like. So if we start bringing these cases, what's happening at the moment in Ireland is that political parties have hijacked the whole cannabis movement that they have, and they've actually left it worse for us, because why, if you were in government, would you legalise cannabis if it was going to build up the opposition party? You wouldn't do it. So if they were genuine about it, they'd be doing their motions in the background, but kind of standing back and saying to the likes of Students for Sensible Drug Policy and other groups, right lads, you take the limelight and we'll back you up, we'll put in whatever political thing it needs. But at the moment what we need people to start being held responsible for their actions. We need to start taking court cases against ministers, saying, okay, if it's illegal, show us all the evidence that rebuts all this evidence that all these countries have legalised on, and if you don't have it, tough shit, pay out. And that's what needs to happen. We need to start making people responsible for their decisions. The mechanisms are there to do it, but we need to start looking maybe at that as well as everything else, because as far as like the whole or making progress, we are making progress, but it's one area in it all that we're lacking in this you know, if we could start taking these cases, clogging up the courts and that, everybody, when they're found guilty of having cannabis, don't plead guilty. Go have a fight, like, you know what I mean? But we should start really getting down into it. Like, they're charging people, for possession of cannabis. They don't even tell you when it's tested what percentage of THC or anything was in it, like. So, like,
I
it's
met
mad.
Mark when he was 17, and he had some cartridge side.
Yeah.
And there was talk then, I knew Horace, his friend, who's passed away
Yeah.
to the heavens. But Horace used to grow his cannabis for him, and Mark used to use it to offset his glaucoma.
Yeah.
And I remember this story coming up, and we're talking the same thing tonight, about you could possibly sue the state for denying the cannabis.
Yeah.
Because you could go blind.
Yeah.
And this has come about, you know. And this man has thought deep about it. From when I first met him at 17, when this thought was floating between Horace and him, and I was in their company, and I picked it up, you know. And I picked it up again. And it's a lot of years done under the water.
Like the research, the fact now, the only difference now is that a lot of governments from around the world are accepting this to be the case, like, you know what I mean? It's not just a chapter in The Emperor Wears No Clothes anymore. What you were saying in The Emperor Wears No Clothes, governments all over the world are accepting this. So, okay, well, if some governments are accepting it, well, unless the Irish government has information that rebuts all the other information, well, then the minister should be sued for what he's doing. Because how can he justify what he's doing? If it's not that he's in bed with the medical companies, what is his reasons? He should, like, by putting him in court, put him on the stand, he now has to explain all this. It's not just justify it to the public anymore. It's no, you're in court here. We're on about your actions. These people need this plant here to keep them alive, or they're going to die. You're saying to them, they can't have it. Okay, why? Let's hear your case here.
We should take the Simon's case and collectively fund the case.
Thanks very much, Mark. We're just going to have Mikki come in on that. A round of applause, please, on that. And I suppose I'll just mention as well, as many of you know, I'm an amateur historian. We know, in fact, the government and doctors within the Irish system back in the 1970s were talking about glaucoma and medical cannabis because it was actually one of the first conditions that was talked about, and a lot of that was based on the research. And actually, technically, it seems that medical cannabis was actually prescribable here until the first Misuse of Drug Act in the 1977s, because you actually have some doctors in the newspapers arguing about this back in the 70s. But anyway, I'm going to let Mikki come in here. I think she has a point to make on that.
I have a point, but I'm going to ask Chris to help me with this point. But that's an excellent point that you made, that actually in the U.S. there was a guy named Bob Rambo who had glaucoma, and he was arrested, and he made the argument in court that he had to choose between his eyesight and going to jail. And actually, that was the beginning. He forced the government to provide him with cannabis, and then we created the Investigational New Drug program as a result back in 1979 or so, 1978. He was the first guy, and then there were other people who got arrested, and they fought the government as well by saying that they cannot make this choice between their lives and their, or their senses. And they started this program and they worked it up with the government, and they still have a few people who are getting marijuana from the government. The University of Mississippi is growing cannabis for these people. I think they only approved about 15 or so people in its heyday, and then they closed it down in 1992 because they started getting a lot of applications from a lot of people with AIDS who said that they needed to live as well. But it's still an active program, but there's only about 3 people left in the program now. One of them also is Elvie Musica, who has glaucoma too. And they get from the government about 300 joints a month. In a canister, that's right. And the prescription is for 10 joints a day of this cannabis, and they are provided through a pharmacy through this program. But I think suing for your right to your sight, to your life, is a good way of trying it. Go for it.
I suppose I might just ask quickly, Tom there, I mean, as someone who took on the court system with himself and his partner over the right to die case, do you think going down the legal route, is this a good option, and how would you go about it if you were advising someone on it?
It's certainly a good option, but one of the difficulties I think we would have, we would have to get, I suppose, the medical evidence that this was going to do the job, if that's the way to put it, that it was going to work. I don't know that we successfully get that here. I know that in my own situation, or in our situation where we took the right to die case to the court, that